Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. It's one of those mornings that I am very happy to have this beautiful talit that I'm still wearing for my bar mitzvah because Rabbi forgot to turn the heat on in advance of coming in this morning, so it's a little bit brisk here in the sanctuary, but hopefully that will keep me awake and keep my voice limber. But I hope wherever you are is a little bit warmer, and I hope that you are staying safe. And let's begin our service as we always do with just a little bit of singing to warm us up, not so much in the physical, but in the spiritual sense. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll begin our service together on page 186 as we begin with thanks and gratitude. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Thanks to you, Adonai, ever living sovereign, that you have restored my soul to me in mercy. How great is your trust. We turn to page 192 at the very top of the page, Ma Tovu. Ma Tovu Alecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma Tovu Alecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Israel. We'll turn now to page 194 and read together in Hebrew at the very top of the page a blessing for our bodies. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yatzar et ha'adam bechokma u'barav nekavim nekavim chalulim chalulim. Galui v'yadua lifnei chisei chavodecha she'im yipatech echad mehem o yisatem echad mehem Yi efshar lehitkayem la'amod lefanecha. Baruch atah Adonai rofech kol basar u'mafli la'asot. We're now on page 196, a prayer for our souls, beginning at the top of the page. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorai. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorai. Elohai neshama shenatata bi Tehora, Tehorahim. Elohai neshama shenatata bi Tehorahim. Elohai neshama shenatata bi Tehorahim. Let's read together in English on page 197 at the very top of the page. Matter is never destroyed, only transformed. So too can the soul evolve higher and higher, from instinct to inspiration, haughtiness to holiness, selfishness to service, from individualism to union, to join with the soul of souls, the infinite one. As the soul is magnified and sanctified, so is the infinite one exalted. Baruch atah Adonai, asher be'ado nefesh kol chai, ve'ruach kol b'sar ish. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 198. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasach b'ivina, lavchin bein yom uvein lahaila. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzah degaber. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish harumim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten layav koach. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir shenam einai u'tenuma be'af apayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifara. If you're still standing, you may be seated at home as we turn to page 204, and we'll begin by reading the Hebrew together at the very top of the page, and then the English at the bottom. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants and descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. We're now on page 206. Elu devarim she'ein lahem shiur, she'adam ochel pirotehem ba'olam hazeh, v'akeren kayemet lo le'olam haba, ve'elu hem kibud avayim ugmilut chasadim, ve'hashkamahat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'aravit, ve'achnasat orchim u'vikor cholim, ve'achnasat kala lebayat hamet v'yun tefillah, V'havat shalom ben adam la'chavero, v'talmud Torah keneged kulam. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 212 for the opening blessing of Pazukei Dezira. Baruch shehamar v'haya ha'olam baruch hu. Baruch Oseh Bereshit, Baruch Omer Ve'osem, Baruch Gozer Umekayem, Baruch Merachem al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem al Habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov Lireyav, Baruch Chaylad V'Kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Bodeh Umatzil, Baruch Shemo. Bishpachot u'bizmirot negadelcha, u'nshabecha nefarecha v'nazkir shimcha v'namlichecha malkeinu Eloheinu, Yachid chei olamim, melech meshubach u'muforad eyad shemo hagadol, Baruch atah Adonai, melech mehulal batishpachot. If you're still standing at home, please be seated. We're on page 214, the second line down in Hebrew. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, Tov Elyon, Tov lehodot, L'Adonai, Lehagid baboker chasdecha, Lehagid baboker chasdecha, Ve'emunatcha ba'alelot, Ve'emunatcha ba'alelot, Tov lehodot l'Adonai. Alei asur v'alei navel, alei gayon bechinor, Ki simchtani Adonai b'po'alecha, B'maaseh yadecha ranen. Magalu Maasechaya, Me'odam ku machshevotecha. Magalu Maasechaya, Me'odam ku machshevotecha. Magalu Maasechaya, Me'odam ku machshevotecha. We're now on page 215. We'll begin together at the top and then continue silently on to the next page. Ashrei Yoshvei Ve'itecha, Od Yehalelucha, Od Yehalelucha. Ashrei Yoshvei Ve'itecha, Od Yehalelucha, Od Yehalelucha. Selam. Ashrei Aham Shekar. Page 218, Psalm 150. Hallelujah, 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 El Bekocho, hallelujah, Birkiahuzo, hallelujah, Bigmurotav, hallelujah, Kerokulo, hallelujah, 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 beteka hashofar, hallelujah, benebel bechinor, hallelujah, betofu machol, hallelujah, beminim vehugal, hallelujah, 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 Shama Hallelujah, 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 Nishmat kol chai tevarech et Shemcha Adonai Eloheinu. We continue silently on page 219. We're now on page 220, top of the page in Hebrew. Ihilu ofinu madeh shira kayam ul shoneinu rina kabon galav vesivtotenu shevach kemacheve rakia veinenu meirot kashemesh vechayareach Ve'yadenu fursot kenishrei shamayim Ve'ragleinu kalahot kayalot Ein anachnu maspikim lehodot lecha Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu Levarech. Continue silently. We're now on page 222, the second paragraph in Hebrew. Shochenan ma'arom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv v'hanenu tzadikim Adonai la'yesharim na'avat elah v'fi yesharim titalalu divrei tzadikim titbarachu b'lshon chasidim titromamu v'kerev kedoshim titkadashu ma'kehalot ribevot amcha be'ed Yisrael berinait ba'ar Shimcha malkeinu bechol dor v'ador yababai yababai bye 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 yababai yababai bye bye yai bye bye yai bye bye yababai bye 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 ay bye bye. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 223 to conclude Pesukei Zimra, and then we remain standing through the Chatzi Kaddish on the next page, and on the page after that we will do the Baruch Hu. Yishtabach Shimcha Alad Malkeinu Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol VeHaKadosh B'Shamayim u'Ba'aretz Ki Lecha Na'e Adonai Eloheinu V'Elohei Avotenu Ve'imotenu Shir Shvacha V'Zimra U'Zumemshala Netzach Gedula U'Gvura Tila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut Brachot Ve'Hodaot Me'ata Ve'ad Olam Baruch Ata Adonai El Melech Gadol Batishpachot El HaHodaot Adonai Niflaot Abocher B'Shirei Zimra Melech El Chei HaOd Amim Yitgadal V'Yitgadash Shemei Rabbah Ve'amad Yivrach Rutei Ve'alich Malchutei V'chayechon V'yamechon V'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala V'izman Kariv V'yimeru Amen. Yeshmei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam Le'amei Amaya Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitbar, Yitramam, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitalem, Yitalam, Shemedek, Ugucha, Brichu, Leila, Mikul Birchata, Veshirata, Tushbachata, Venechamata, Damiram, Me'amam, Nimeru, Amen. We're now on page 226. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed. Please be seated at home. We're going to turn now to page 228. We'll read together in English beginning at the bottom of the page, and then we'll do the 3 lines in Hebrew just above. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai, in wisdom you formed them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Or Chadash, Al Tzion Tahir. Or Chadash, Al Tzion Tahir. V'nizkechu lanu, Me'era le'oro. V'nizkechu lanu, Me'era le'oro. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam. Yadadai Baruch Atah Adonai Yotzer HaMe'orot. We turn now to page 230, and we'll begin by reading together the English at the top of the page and then the Hebrew at the bottom. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears, whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah. V'ha'erinenu b'toratecha v'dahabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha v'yached lehevabeinu le'ahava u'lira et shemecha Velo nevosh, velo nikalem, velo nikashel, leolam vaed, ki veshem kohochecha, agadol v'anora batachnu, nagila v'nismecha b'yeshuatecha. Ve'havienu leshalom me'arba kanfot haaretz ve'tolichenu komemiut le'artzenu ki el poel yeshuot ata ubanu v'charta ve'keravtanu leshimcha hagadol sela be'emet להודות לך יחדך באהבה, ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. We're on page 234. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושינתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לתותפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. On page 236. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית על כנף פתיל תכלת והיה לכם לציצית וריתם אותו וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם מאחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריהם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together on the top of page 239. Emet, there is no place where you are not. Even in the wilderness there is your word. Emet, that pen strokes of lightning, white fire, and black flame stir the soul's passion, guide our sacred way. True and enduring is Torah. Your truth for us is certain and established, now and forevermore. Like Moses, Miriam, and all Israel, we sing out and rejoice. We're now on page 238, the 4 lines up from the middle of the page in Hebrew, beginning with the words Tehilot le'el Elyon. Tehilot le'el Elyon, Baruch hu mevorach, Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael, lechanu shira, besimcha rabba ve'amru chulam, micha mahocha, ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocham nedar ba'kodesh, nora tehilot osef elem, hayla shira chadasha shivchu geulim, leshimcha al sfatayam, yachad kulam hodu, והמליכו והאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ופדה כנומך יהודה וישראל Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvahot Shemo Kedosh Yisrael Baruch Atah Adonai Kahal Yisrael. We rise in body or spirit as we begin the Amidah together on page 242, and then we continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and if you are standing at the end, you may be seated. Adonai Sefata Tiftach Ufi Yagi Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 324 for the repetition of the Amidah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Eloi Avotenu Imotenu, Eloi Abraham, Eloi Yitzchak, Eloi Yaakov, Eloi Sarah, Eloi Rivka, Eloi Rachel, Eloi Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor, HaNorah, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, Vekone HaKol, Vezocher Chasdei Avot Ve'imahot, Umevei Gula Lifnei B'neihem, Leman Shemo B'Yava, Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham, Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei Metim Ataram Loshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem, Mechakel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechayei Metim B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rafech Olim, U'Matir Asurim, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מחמוך בגבורות ומידו מלך ממית ומחייב ומצמיח ישועה ונאמרת על חיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. We're on page 326. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום. ככתוב על יד אביך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ, כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו הוא אבינו מלכנו ומושיענו והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. Hallelujah. We're now on page 328. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד קולך. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד קולך. ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא יבוש לעולם לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Still standing, please be seated. We're now on page 329, the very top of the page. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. מקדשי שביעי שבת כולם ישמחו ויתענגו מטובך שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו שבת. חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. ישמחו במלכותך Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat, Lekorei Oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu, Eloi Avotenu, V'imotenu, Ritzei, Ritzei, V'imnuchateinu. Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, v'ten lechelkeinu b'toratecha, sahabeinu mituvecha, v'samechenu b'shuatecha, v'taher libeinu, le'ovdecha be'emet, ve'anchileinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Ay lay 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 Mi'avav ratzon Shabbat kodshecha v'nuchuva Yisrael mekadshesh shemecha Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. On page 330, we'll read together now in English. On this Shabbat day, as you graciously receive our prayers, help us to hear your call. Grant us enough health to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults, and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged, hope enough to overcome all fears for the future, and faith enough to know your presence. O source of blessing, look with favor upon us. May our offerings be acceptable to you. Baruch atah Adonai, shodcha levatcha b'yirah navod. We'll turn now to page 332. We'll begin reading at the very bottom of the page in English together, and at the end of each paragraph we'll say in Hebrew the words Modim anachnu lach, offering our gratitude to God for all of these gifts. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations. Modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, Modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, Modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice, in the midst of hostility and oppression. Modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. Modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. Modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. Modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha u'lechanayeh lehodot. Turn now to page 334, Sim Shalom, a prayer for peace. Sim Shalom, tova uvracha, chen ma'achesed berachamim aleinu, Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, Barcheinu yotzreinu kulanu kechad, me'or panecha, ki ve'or panecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chema chesed berachamim aleinu, Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, Torat chaim ve'ahavat chesed, u'tzedaka u'veracha verachamim v'chaim v'shalom. Sim shalom, tova u'veracha, chen v'chesed verachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, ve'tov einecha levarech, et amcha Yisrael bechol et u'bechol sham bishlomecha. Sim shalom tova ubracha. En v'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael. Amecha baruch atah Adonai. Hamevarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. Let's read together now in English on the top of page 337. Prayer is not purely an act. All things pray and all things pour forth their souls. The heavens pray, the earth prays, every creature and every living thing. In all life there is longing. Creation is itself but a longing, a kind of prayer to the Almighty. What are the clouds, the rising and the setting of the sun, the soft radiance of the moon and the gentleness of the night? What are the flashes of the human mind and the storms of the human heart? They are all prayers, the wordless outpouring of boundless longing for God. Oseh shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amen. We now turn to page 362 for Seder Kriyat Torah, the Torah service, and we rise in body or spirit as the ark is open. Ein kamocha b'Elohim Adonai ve'ein kema'asecha malchutcha malchut kol olamim. וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. אבא הרחמים, היטיבה ברצונך את ציון. תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי בך לבד בטחנו, מלך אלרם ונישא, אדון עולמים. כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. אחד אלוהינו גדול אדוננו קדוש שמו. גדול אדוני תהיו נרוממה שמו יחדיו. לך אדוני הגדולה והגבורה והתפארת והנצח וההוד, כי כה בשמיים ובארץ, כי כה בשמיים ובארץ. לך אדוני הממלכה והמתנשא לכל ראש. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי Romemu Adonai Eloheinu veishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu veishtachavu lehar kodsho. Okay, please be seated if you are still standing. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Sorry, forgive me for a second. Torah was rolled. Forgot to go back. But we'll continue. And one of the great things about this week's portion is it's one of the easiest to find in the entire Torah because it contains Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, which is part of the reason why I want to make sure we're in exactly the right spot. And will become the focus of our discussion this morning. This, as we know, Shirat Hayam, the song that our ancestors sung at the shores of the sea as they watched it miraculously part and walk through. And it is what ultimately gives this Shabbat a particular name of Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of song. And it's really all related to this one seminal kind of moment, this moment in which our ancestors really found themselves at the precipice of their end. And then, as we've been talking about the last several weeks, of signs and wonders and miracles, both great and terrible, that God has meted out, that this is really the sort of final one that is part of the redemptive act, right? Part of the helping the Israelites to escape from slavery. It's the final act. It's the thing that makes it really possible. Many more miracles, many more signs and wonders to come, but certainly this is one of the iconic moments, not just really in Jewish history, but really, frankly, in human history, right? Certainly of any Western religion, all of us share this sort of similar narrative of the experience of the Israelites coming through the Red Sea and onto the other side of freedom. But ultimately speaking, at this point in human history, I'd be very surprised if this story wasn't known or told really in every part of the world, even if this is not part of a religious or cultural background. So it certainly speaks to some very significant elements, certainly of Judaism, but I think also, as I said, of a wider consciousness around this story. So this morning, we're going to read basically from the beginning of the Aliyah that leads into Shirat Hayam. I really only know a little bit of it, so I'm going to do the first 6 verses or so that you could hear the special melody, but we'll begin with the preamble, which starts on page 437 in the Plowed Chumash, and in the Torah Women's Commentary on page 385. So again, in the Women's Commentary 385, and the Plowed Chumash 437. In both cases, you're looking for verse 26. Verse 26. And you'll notice in very small, faint letter just above verse 26, you should see the letter Pei in Hebrew. That this is an indication in a Tanakh or in a Chumash of when there is a new Aliyah beginning. So as I said, it's the beginning of the Aliyah that then leads into Shirat Hayam. And if you go on to the next page, in both cases, you will see it perfectly set up exactly as it is set up in the Torah itself, which when I do Hagbah, hopefully you'll get a little bit of a glimpse of. But ultimately speaking, it's one of the unique places in the Torah in which there is a different kind of, I guess, what would we call it, artistic depiction. In other words, that instead of it being simple blocks of text, we see what I think is called a brick-on-brick style of poetic verse. So it's really quite a striking piece. But that is not actually where I want to focus my remarks this morning. I want to share with you actually a really beautiful teaching that was shared on reformjudaism.com, which is an amazing resource. I don't think enough of us really go to or use. Every week has different commentaries and has archives of commentaries going back on every single parsha. And I came across this one actually. It's not the person who I was familiar with before. She is an author and a poet. Her name is Stacy Zissek Robinson. She happens to be a member of Congregation Hakafa in Glencoe, Illinois. It's a great name for a shul, by the way. I think that's great, Congregation Hakafa. And she writes a really very personal but very powerful piece, in particular, and we'll explain it as we go, related to one of the most important midrash associated with the crossing of the Red Sea and the identification of a particular hero named Nachshon ben Aminadav, who really is the one who makes it possible in the end for God's miracle to be activated. And I'll explain a little bit more as we go. But she comes at this whole conversation from a very, as I said, personal place, seeing not herself necessarily in the story of the Israelites, but herself in the emotional experience of the Israelites as they are standing literally with their heels to the fire, so to speak, as they're being chased by the Pharaoh and the chariots on their way out of Egypt. So she writes as follows. And I'll just say that this is excerpted from, because of need for brevity, worth going to read the thing in its entirety, and I'll try to indicate where I'm skipping along. So she starts at this. I'm in one of those places, stuck prickly at the very edge of letting go, trembling with the effort to not tip over into the edge of the abyss of the unknown, desperate to take that final leap of faith and soar toward light and wholeness. I am astounded, as always, when I think how inextricably intertwined my fear and my faith have become. I've heard that fear is an absence of faith, but I don't think so. I'm too intelligent, and God is too intelligent, to demand blind faith like that, to insist that faith is a guard against fear. Fear keeps the lights on at night, and smells of sweat and tension and anxiety sharp and unpleasant. If the fear is great enough, it can keep me rooted and curled in on myself, covers pulled tightly over my head, moving paralyzed and invisible. Faith is a sweet and sure and graceful. It wraps around me like light. It sometimes moves mountains. More often than not, it is just enough. It's not enough to beat back the darkness or vanquish my demons, but enough to put one foot in front of the other and to walk, however falteringly, forward. Faith is to know that no matter what, I will be okay. And so faith and grace being what they are, I think of my fear and my stuckness, and I'm reminded of this week's Torah portion, Parshat Beshalach. And I know that in the midst of my darkness, there is also redemption and release. So here she goes on in greater detail. I'm just going to paraphrase again the Midrash of Nachshon. And the idea is that basically the Israelites are standing at the shores. Moshe has lifted his arms. Nothing is happening. Right? The promise that the sea is going to part isn't happening at all. The chariots and Pharaoh's elite forces are coming, chasing them down. And they're basically stuck between the water that will kill them and the Pharaoh that will kill them. And the only way to get out of the Pharaoh's clutches is to somehow miraculously get from one side of the sea to the other. And the only way, of course, is by the promise that the sea itself is going to split. And while Moshe is doing his thing and God says that this is going to happen, nothing ultimately happens. And so this one individual that the tradition later identifies as Nachshon ben Aminadav, who, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere else in the tradition, Nachshon's wife is Aaron's sister. So that's another separate thing. But he basically decides on his own that nothing is going to happen unless there is some demonstration that the people understand, that people believe that God's promise is going to take place. So rather than waiting for the miracle to happen, Nachshon essentially walks his way into the sea, and only by the time I think it gets up to his chin, if I remember correctly, do the waters finally part. So it's not even like he walks in and he dips his toe in, and that's enough. It really has to demonstrate up to the point in which, right, we cease to be able to survive underwater because our mouth and our nose will suddenly become submerged. We get this demonstration of faith, and suddenly the people are free, and we know the rest of the story. So I'll pick back up from our teaching from this morning, from Stacy Robinson, in which she then continues. It says, Nachshon and the 600,000 stood at the shivery edge of that sea, staring at the infinite horizon in front and the pointy, roiling chaos of death and slavery behind them. They stood planted, and let's face it, not just planted, but rooted in their fear and mistrust and doubt. And then in the midst of that fear and doubt, something changed. Nachshon, recently freed, trapped between death by water and death by bleeding, did the miraculous. He put one foot in front of the other and walked into the sea. The 600,000 held their collective breath, watching the scene unfold before them as Nachshon did what they could not. He decided to have faith. And though the water covered first his ankles, then his knees, then his chest, then kept rising until he was almost swallowed whole, Nachshon kept walking and kept believing. And just when it seemed that he was a fool for his faith, that he would surely drown in that infinite sea, another miracle. The waters parted, the 600,000 breathed again, in one relieved whoosh of air, and they found their own faith and followed Nachshon into the dry sea to cross the other side. And then the journey truly began. And she finishes in this way. I pray to have faith enough to walk into my own sea of doubt and fear and darkness. I want to walk and feel the waters part, to be released from the tangled web of thoughts that hold me immobile and disconnected. I have learned again and again without fail that when I take that step, when I find the faith to put one foot in front of the other and to trust as Nachshon did, that I am carried forward. I am freed from my self-imposed bondage. I am enough, and I can walk again on dry lands to freedom. So as I said, I really think if you can find some time, please go read her words in their entirety. She, as I said, is an author and a poet, so you may even like her writing enough to consider perhaps getting one of her works. And if you're looking for the whole thing, it's called Faith, Fear, and the Story of Nachshon in the Red Sea on ReformedJudaism.com. So again, I think the beauty of this, the story of Nachshon, can be used in many different ways. As I've told this story before, certainly in relationship to something that my dad did at the Heschel School when the first graduating class of students was meant to graduate. At that point, to the 8th grade was the end of the Heschel School. There was no high school. My dad and I assume Rabbi Dov and a few others sort of realized that there needed to be some acknowledgement of this group and of the parents also, really ultimately speaking, being part of it, because they demonstrated a faith in an idea that they did not yet have corroborative evidence to prove would work. In other words, when the Heschel School started out, it was a fairly radical kind of idea of a pluralistic Jewish day school and didn't have the trappings of the other big institutions in New York City, Jewish or otherwise. Ultimately speaking, the parents who committed their children to that program, especially the ones so early on, they did so really out of faith. They believed in an idea enough to send their most precious gift, their children, to the school. And so it was important to acknowledge them in some way. And so the decision, I think this was my dad's idea in the end, was to call an award called the Nachshon Award, and to deliver it and give it to the parents so that they would have some way of understanding that on the receiving end of that faith, that they didn't do it without acknowledgement, right? That there is an acknowledgement of what faith ultimately looks like, that idea of belief in something. And I think what I love so much about what Stacy writes here is that ultimately speaking, this idea of faith and this idea of fear tend to be connected to each other, but connected probably in the wrong kind of way. In other words, that they're presented as sort of opposites of each other or answers to each other. That basically if one is fearful, it's because they have a lack of faith, and if they just have faith that everything's going to be okay, then somehow or another their fear will disappear. And I don't think that's really how it works, and that's certainly not the way that Stacy seems to understand it either. And the way that she describes faith is really not so much a sort of complete belief that everything will be perfect or okay, or that there are no problems, there's no reason to be afraid, but simply to say that we can draw from a sense of faith to help us put one foot in front of the other. And especially in really hard times, times in which it feels like we're really only given one choice or the other, two different modes to destruction, that there often is another way, but the only way we can see that other path, miraculous or otherwise, is to begin to believe that there is an alternative to destruction, that there is an alternative to the negative. And that ultimately speaking, the direction to go in is with one foot in front of the other, that you can't transport yourself necessarily, but it takes a certain amount of courage based in faith to take that first step, and then to take the next, and then to take the next after. I think that's one of the things that's really clear to me about the Midrash, and much more crystallized after reading her work, is that the story of Nachshon is important, that it goes into the detail of coming so far up to the mouth, right? That the faith of his steps was not all at once. It was still continuing each step, knowing that nothing had yet changed, right? Nothing had changed up to his knees, up to his waist, up to here, right? Only up until the point in which you get to here, he doesn't really know. He just believes again that if he keeps moving forward and he keeps believing ultimately that God's promise is real, that the end result will be ultimately positive. And as I think this is the last time I taught this particular Midrash, I reminded everyone that you can't also take the faith piece away from the people either. That it's understandable to know that they were freaked out and that they didn't necessarily jump into the sea. But remember that even once the waters part, it takes a certain amount of courage to imagine walking through a miraculously parted sea. Because at any point, as the Egyptians will find out shortly after, those seas can come crashing right back down again. Can you imagine what it's like to walk several miles through a dry seabed looking on either side at miraculously standing water? Can't even begin to fathom what kind of courage that takes, what kind of faith that takes. So we should be very careful also not to take away from our ancestors and to consider that the rest of them were somehow less than because Nachshon was more. Nachshon basically gave everyone an example, and sometimes that's what we need. And I think we have to be those examples for each other right now, especially where we're feeling despondent and afraid and hiding behind our blankets, is that we have to look at each other and see we're each trying to take a step forward. Let's take positive steps forward. And I can see already that we're sort of sliding backwards. We need to really plant ourselves and consider again that our faith in God is a faith in each other, our faith in humanity, our faith in the possibility of a better future. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. And a reminder again, when I read the Torah, that it'll begin with regular Torah trope, and then as we get to the beginning of Shirat Hayam, we'll chant a few of the verses in the special melody so that you'll get a chance to hear it. And perhaps by next year I'll have learned the entire thing, in which case we can do that as well. So just a reminder again, we're going to start in the Plav Chumash on page 437 and the Women's Torah Commentary on 385. In both cases, we're going to start on verse 26, and then as you reach the bottom of the page, flip over to the next, and that will take you to Shirat Hayam, which is, as I said, laid out a bit differently and quite unique. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaBorach. Baruch Adonai HaBorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher natan lanu, asher bachar banu mikol hamim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. Nete et yadecha al hayam, ve'ashu hamayim al Mitzrayim, al riech bo ve'al parashav. Vayet Moshe et yado al hayam, vayashov hayam. Lifnot boker le'etano, u'mitzrayim nasim likrato, va'ina'er Adonai et Mitzrayim betoch hayam, ve'yashuvu hamayim, va'yechasu et harechev, ve'et haparashim lechol chel paro habaim achareihem bayam lo nish'ar bahem ad echad u'bnei Yisrael Halechu vayevasha betoch hayam, vehamayim lahem nachoma, mimenam umismolam. Vayosha Adonai, vayom hahu, et Israel miyad Mitzrayim. Vayar Israel et Mitzrayim, met al sefat hayam. Vayar Israel et hayad hagedolah, asher aso Adonai b'Mitzrayim. Vayir'u hayam, vayir'u ha'am. Et Adonai, ve'aminu Adonai, u'Moshe abedo. Az yashir Moshe u'bnei Yisrael, et hashira hazot l'Adonai, vayomru lemor, hashira l'Adonai, ki gaoga, sus verochvo ramamayam, ozi vezimrat yam, vayhili Mehu, Elohei Avi Veromenu, Adonai Ish Milchama, Adonai Shemo, Markevot Paro V'chayalo, Yaharav Ayam, Umibchar Shalishav, Tuhu Ve'yam Suf, Tehomot Yechas Yumu, Yahardu Bim Solot Kmo Aven, Yemincha Adonai, Nedarhi Makoach, Yemincha Adonai, Tiratoye. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Before we lift and dress the Torah, we'll take a moment as we turn to page 371 to offer our Mishaberach, our prayer for healing. Mishaberach Avotenu v'imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah U'yivarech et hacholim ha'elu. We begin by thinking of those in our community and connected to our community in need of healing. Peter Parcher, Gluckman family, Audrey Lubo, Evie Romano, Chaim Leib, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Phyllis Silver, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Sandra Furman, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skid, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Roz Brody, Chana Ruth Batsara, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Menchaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kossoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, and Samuel Moskowitz. If you're thinking of anyone this morning who's in need of healing, please feel free to mention their names aloud, and if not, just simply hold them in your hearts and minds. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim aleihem lahachalimam leraputam lechazikam yishlach lehem mehera refuah shlema min hashamayim refuat hanefesh refuat haguf hashta b'agalav zman kariv and Omar Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah bless and heal those who are suffering. May the blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say together, Amen. El na refana la, el na refana la, el na refana la, refuah shelema, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, refuah shelema. And we'll turn back just one page to page 370 at the bottom as we prepare to lift and dress the Torah. And as I said, I will do my very best so hopefully you can see the Torah text itself and the unique way in which that it is scribed into the Torah text. And if not, then I promise that hopefully by next year we will be back together at this time and we'll be happy to show everyone in person. Maybe we'll look at some pictures during Torah study. So again, we rise in body or spirit as the Torah is lifted. Ezot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael Al Pi Adonai Biad Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah Tzivanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Okay, if you're still standing, you can be seated at home. So this morning's Haftarah is a little bit on the longer side, but with very good reason, and it is directly connected in a few different ways to this morning's Parsha, but the most important is this is Shabbat Shirah, and the Torah portion contains Shirat Hayam, which really, ultimately speaking, is directly connected to the prophetess Miriam. Today we get a different kind of Shirah, Shirat Devorah. We get the story of Devorah and Sisera and Yael, and at the end, again, we have sort of a historical piece here from the books of Judges, but then eventually we get also a little bit of the Shirah at the very end. So as I said, it's a little bit on the longer side, but I really would love to read it in its entirety. And as you will notice from both the reading of Devorah's song and ultimately of the Song of the Sea, these aren't exactly flowery songs. They are victory songs. They are songs of salvation, which inevitably carry language of vanquished foes. So, again, depending on your sort of perspective on things in general, depending on what time in history you are looking at these texts, there is oftentimes a greater resonance or dissonance depending on how we relate to these kinds of words of celebration through victory over others. However, of course, understanding the nature of the circumstances in both cases, there is certainly an element of it that says there would have been no salvation had there not been a vanquished foe. And we have to reconcile those kinds of things, and perhaps that may be some of where we get to in our Torah study this morning. But if you're following at home and you have a plowed Chumash, the reading will begin on page 462. Page 462. If you're following in some other form, you're looking for the, again, Haftarah for Parshat Beshalach. It begins in the book of Judges, chapter 4, verse 4, and continuing through chapter 5, verse 31, which should be the end of that chapter. Before we start the reading, I'll read the blessings again on our prayer book, page 372. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbiim tovim v'ratza b'divrehem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'torah u'Moshe avdo v'Yisrael amo v'b'nbiei ha'emet v'tzedek. Again, page 462 if you have a plowed Chumash at home. Judges chapter 4, verse 4. Deborah, wife of Lapidot, the woman, was a prophet. At that time, she was the leader of all Israel. She used to sit under Deborah's palm between Ramah and Beit El in the hill country of Ephraim when the people of Israel came to her for decisions. So she sent for Barak, son of Abinoam of Kadesh, in the territory of Naphtali, and said to him, "The Eternal, the God of Israel, commands you to draw up at Mount Tabor. Take with you 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. Then I will draw Sisera, Yavin's army commander, with his chariots and troops to the Wadi Kishon, and I will hand him over to you." And Barak answered, "I will go only if you come with me. If you don't, I won't go either." "I will most certainly go with you," she said, "but you will gain no glory on the path that you are taking, for now the Eternal will hand Sisera over to a woman," which you can imagine is being said quite sarcastically. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak called the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun to Kadesh, and 10,000 men then followed him on the march, and Deborah went up with him. Now it happened that Chever, the Kenite, had moved away from the other Kenites, the descendants of Chobav, Moses' father-in-law. This is another name for Yitro. He had pitched his tent at Kadesh, at Oak of Bezanaim. When his scouts told Sisera that Barak had gone up to Mount Tabor, he called out his chariots. He had 900 iron chariots, and his troops from Charoshet Goyim to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Up, this is the day on which the Eternal will put Sisera in your hands. The Eternal is marching ahead of you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor along with 10,000 men, and the Eternal threw Sisera, his chariots, and his whole army into disarray because of Barak's onslaught. Sisera got down out of his chariot and ran away on foot. As Barak pursued the remaining chariots and soldiers as far as Charoshet Goyim, all of Sisera's soldiers fell by the sword, not one was left alive. Sisera, however, escaped on foot and came to the tent of Yael, wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was peace between King Yavin of Chazor and the family of Heber the Kenite. Yael came out to greet Sisera, and she said, "Come here, my lord, come here. There is nothing to be afraid of." So he went into the tent, and she covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Let me have a little water, if you please, I'm thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk, gave him some to drink, and covered him again. He said, "Stand at the door of the tent, and if anyone comes, and then if anyone asks if anyone is here, tell him no, there is no one here." Sisera was exhausted and fell asleep. And then Yael took a tent peg and a mallet. Quietly she went up to him and drove the peg into the side of his head right through to the ground. So it was that he died. When Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Yael came out to greet him, she said. She said, "Come here, and I will show you the man that you're looking for." He came after her and found Sisera lying dead, with the tent peg in the side of his head. That day God humbled Yavin, king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. The power of the Israelites bore on Yavin, king of Canaan, with increasing severity until they destroyed him. And this begins Shirat Devorah. On that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. When Israelites let their hair grow loose, when people volunteer themselves, praise the Eternal. Listen, kings, hear you rulers. I sing to the Eternal, I sing. I chant to the Eternal, the God of Israel. Eternal One, when you went forward from Seir, when you marched from the land of Edom, earth shook, sky dripped, yes, the clouds poured down water. The mountains quaked before the Eternal, the One of Sinai, before the Eternal, the God of Israel. In the time of Shamgar, son of Anat, in the time of Yael, roads had fallen into disuse, travelers had taken the back roads, all governance had left Israel, till you rose up, Deborah. You rose, a mother in Israel. Israel chose new gods. There was war in the gates. Among 40,000 in Israel, no shield nor spear was to be seen. My heart goes out to Israel's leaders, those of the people who offered themselves. Praise the Eternal. You riders on white donkeys, you who sit on saddles, and you who walk the roads, ponder this well. Hark, the bards strike up among the water troughs. There they tell the victories of the Eternal, the victorious rule of the Eternal in Israel. The people of the Eternal march down to the gates and call, "Rouse yourself, Deborah, rouse yourself, and sing a song. Arise, Barak, son of Abinoam, take your captives." Thereupon the survivors defeated the mighty, the people of the Eternal defeated the warriors for me. Out of the land of Ephraim, that once was Amalek's, they came, and then Benjamin after you with your troops. Leaders came down from Machir, and out of Zvulun, bearers of the ruler's scepter. The leaders of Issachar were with Deborah, as Issachar, so Barak. They followed his charge down the valley, and in Reuven's divisions were some leaders of resolute mind. Why then do you others stay behind among the sheepfolds, listening to the piping to the flocks? Reuven's divisions had chiefs who wrestled only in their minds. Gilead stayed east of the Jordan. Why did Dan keep to their ships? Asher remained at the shore of the sea, sticking to their landfalls. But Zvulun was a troop that scorned death, along with Naphtali on the open heights. Kings came and fought. The kings of Canaan fought in Tanakh by Megiddo's waters, yet won no spoil or silver there. From heaven itself they fought. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera. The Wadi Kishon swept them away, the raging waters of Wadi Kishon. March on, my soul, with might. Then the hooves were pounding, and the stallions were galloping along. Curse Meroz, says God's angel. Curse bitterly all who live there. They never came to the aid of the Eternal to help the Eternal against the warriors. Most blessed of women be Yael, wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed of the women in tents. He asked for water, she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a bowl fit for the mighty. One hand reached for the tent peg, the other took a laborer's hammer. She hammered Sisera and smashed his head, piercing and passing right through his temples. He sinks, falls, lies at her feet. He sinks, he falls at her feet. Where he sank, there he fell down dead. Out of the window looks Sisera's mother. She peers through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why are the chariot's hoofbeats delayed? Her wisest ladies answer her, and she tells herself the same. They're dividing the spoil they have found, a girl or two for each man. Dyed cloth, a sister's spoil, embroidered cloth, and dyed, two for every spoiler's neck. Let all your enemies, Eternal One, end like that. But let those who love you be as the sun rising in its might. And the land was at rest for 40 years. I told you, not simple stuff. We're back now in our prayer books, page 372. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh, ha'mdaber u'mkayem, shekol dvarav emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al nevi'im ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת Amen. We now rise as we turn to page 376, a prayer for our country, beginning in the middle of the page. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free and to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home, and when you see the naked, give clothing. Do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace. May we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. Prayer for the State of Israel, page 377. Avinu shebashamayim, tzur Yisrael v'go'alo, barech et medinat Yisrael, reshit tzmichat geulatenu. Hagen alea be'avrat chastecha, ufros alea sukat shlomecha, ושלח אורך ועמיתך לראשיה, שריה ויועציה. ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך, ונתת שלום בארץ, ושמחת עולם ליושביה, ונאמר Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen. You remain standing as we turn back to page 374 as the Torah is returned to the Ark. Ya'alelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizkav shemaho levado, odo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren liyamu, tehila lechol chasida, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati, al tazovu et chayim hi, lama chazikim ba, v'tomecheha meushar, Teracheha, Darchei Noam, V'chol Netimoteha, Shalom, Ashivenu Adonai, Elecha ben Hashuv
ימינו כקדם.
You remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 586 at the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol latet gedula liotzer breshit shelo asanu kegoyeh haratzot velo samanu kemishmechot adama shelo samachelkenu kahem negor aleinu kechol amonam v'anachnu korimnu mishnachavim umodim לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומשה ביקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים הוא אלוהינו ההינון אמת מלכינו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום והשבותה אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת עינון ונאמר וחיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Now invite those at home who are in mourning observing yahrzeit to rise in body or spirit. As first we remember those who passed in recent months. Miles Ambrose, Fred Eber, Nancy Fisher, Saul Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Friedman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Phyllis Katz, Laura Kurz, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Vera Shaps, Norma Small, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, Ann Weiss, Marvin Weiss, and Mary Cruz Merlos. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during last week for Janet Blum, Judith Brandenburg, Louis Field, Yale Gelman, Esther Gilbert, Stanley Hemley, Terry Katz, May Kelman, Jack Klitnick, Barnett Kruger, Samuel Marks, Estelle Posner, Murray Potashik, Abraham Riskin, Maya Ridvo, Beverly Ronick, Carol and Richard Schein, Joseph Schultz, Mary Goldstein Simmons, Lola Snyder, Frida Tarlow. And if you're thinking of anyone this morning who we did not mention and you'd like to mention their names, please do so now. We join together on page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, ve'alma dibrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayi dechol beit Yisrael, v'agalav v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'olam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha grichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata v'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. If you're still standing, please be seated. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Just a few quick announcements before we conclude our service. The first is, of course, to please join us for Torah study beginning at 12 o'clock on Zoom. And a reminder that next week's Torah study will be using a Torah Women's Commentary. And we're very excited, as we always are. And unfortunately, I just don't have the information in front of me as to who our facilitator is for next week. But I'm sure that it's in the e-blast, and I'm sure that Ruth can inform us when we get to Torah study in just a little bit. Just a reminder of a few other upcoming events. The youth group will be having a virtual meeting on Sunday at 5 o'clock. Then a mitzvah will be meeting together on Zoom on Mondays at 11:30 a.m. If you're interested in joining that group, please contact Andrea Fagan. If you don't know how to do that, please let us know in the office. We'll be happy to make that connection. Hebrew School will also be in session on Zoom on Monday morning at 4, and the Social Justice Committee will have its regular virtual meeting at 5. My class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets will be on Wednesday at 12 o'clock. And B'nai Mitzvah will be a little bit later in the day at 4. We look forward to, on Wednesday evening, a very special presentation and event beginning at 7 o'clock in celebration of Black History Month, We are welcoming our award-winning author, performer, and producer, Harry Sapoznik, who will engage us in a presentation on the lost world of African-American cantors. The event is being generously sponsored by our members Larry and Susan Morter, and we really appreciate that. And this is really one of those you can't miss kinds of experiences. So please, again, Wednesday, 7 o'clock, free and open to all. Tell friends of yours, share the registration link by all means. We welcome all. Reminder again that on Friday mornings at 9 o'clock is my class on Pirkei Avot. Also, just to highlight a couple other things coming up in February. The February calendar should have been in last week's e-blast and is now on our website. So we got a lot of stuff going on. Let's see, we have our art workshop with Lorraine Pepper on February 9th. We have a Zoom author talk with Dasi Berkowitz, who many of you will still remember very fondly from when she and Rabbi Leon were the leaders of this community. She has written a new book, and she's going to share a little bit of that experience with us. And again, that is on February 14th. The Social Justice Committee will also be presenting a wonderful program titled Expressing Social Justice Through Dance on February 15th. And as well on February 17th, we didn't quite get to all of the questions in our shared legacy panel from last month or this month. So my father and Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson will join me again on February 17th to continue that conversation. Also on the 18th, there is a discussion on coping and resilience during COVID that's being led by a number of our incredible members of our community who themselves have been on the front lines in various ways, in which we're all trying to think about, again, these ideas of coping and resilience. So that is February 18th. And of course, a reminder that at the end of the month, we'll be celebrating the holiday of Purim. Sadly, again, online this year, but we do have something special planned for a few things. So keep your eyes out for more information about Purim as well. Always check your weekly e-blast, check the website. If you're not getting any emails for any reason, please let the office know. It's really the only way we know if anything is wrong. And as I remind everyone, just please join us for our Torah study in just a few minutes on Zoom at 12 o'clock. So we're going to conclude our service with Ein Keloheinu, and then we'll do Kiddush. Ein Keloheinu is on page 626. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadoneinu, Michemalkeinu, Michemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adoneinu, Nodel Emalkeinu, Nodel Oshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adoneinu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adoneinu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. If you have any wine or grape juice at home, you can join me on page 604. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti leolam, oti leolam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ubayom hashvi'i Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Al ken berach Adonai et yom ha-Shabbat vayikadshehu savri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Amen. Fine. Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay warm if you're up here in the Northeast. Join us for Torah study at noon. If not, I hope to see you at some point over the week, if not before next Shabbat. Again, Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining.